All right, it's Jackson from Country Red Fruit, and we are talking about the May release, 2021. This is a set of wines that we've dubbed Flower, Spring, Earth. And the point here is that we are dealing with wines that are very floral in their flavor profiles, they're earthy in their flavor profiles. They kind of remind you of spring. And the other thing that's happening with this release is just this theme of discovery and rebirth and regeneration. That's kind of how we feel around springtime. And also just we're showcasing wines that have never been seen in a circle release. A couple of these things I've never had before I tasted them to get ready for this release. So I wanted to showcase really interesting things that were just a little bit out there and a little bit different. So we're starting with Petit Natural, or Pet Nat, from Italy. This is Il Mostro Bianco, and this is made from Abruzzo in the region of Italy, and it's made from Pecorino and Chardonnay, which grow locally. A Pet Nat is like a champagne, but it's produced and they leave the lees in the bottle. There's spent yeast cells, so that's why it's all cloudy and a little bit more funky looking. But there's something about those lees that give it a really wonderful chalky texture. When I smell this wine, I don't just smell fruit. I mean, there's certainly a little bit of like pear and apple and some citrus qualities. The other thing I love about this is all the other sort of savory qualities, the earthy qualities happening in here. Fresh hay and green grass and wheatgrass and fresh green olive oil. If you've ever had really good dark green, almost like neon green olive oil that's from the fresh harvest, this is reminiscent of that. It has that earthy, tangy quality to it. On the palate, this is a dry wine. It's very mouthfilling and has a combo of really nice, rich fruit and earth, but it finishes nice and brisk and dry. So I think this Mostro Bianco, the label's cool. It's just really pretty, and to me, it's reminiscent of just really rustic countryside sparkling wine, which is exactly what it is. And that's why we thought it would be a cool pick for this release. The next wine in this release is from the Valle de Guadalupe in Baja, Mexico. This is not a place that is very widely known for growing wines, but it is becoming more popular. This producer has actually been very hard for me to track down. I've been trying to find these wines and try these wines for years, and I finally just tried them for the first time this year. Their name is Beachy, which is actually a Sonoran state dialect term for naked. What I love about these wines is that idea of nakedness translates to their philosophy. They are shooting for nothing added, nothing manipulated, nothing additional in the cellar. So that means out in the vineyard, completely organic and completely natural viticulture, nothing in terms of chemicals added to their vines, but also it means in the cellar that there's just wild yeast used and nothing in terms of adjustments or additives. So yeah, it's a funky wine. This is a very different flavor profile if you're used to drinking sort of the more mainstream grocery store wines. That's what I love about it. It is very wild, it's very alive. This is something that wants spicy food or garlicky food or something a little bit funkier and different. And that's why I love it. So we're gonna drink this. Wow. Beyond some of the fruit profile of this wine, the cranberry, the rose petal, some of the cherry notes, rhubarb even, what I love about this is that tangy, almost like vinegar quality, like the same you'd get in drinking really good brewed kombucha, or a little bit of that tangy gingery quality from like really nice spicy ginger beer. This Beachy wine is called the Beachy Rosa, and all of their labels have luchador masks or naked people wearing luchador masks on them. It's a 2019 vintage. They actually don't know what grapes go into this, which is really awesome, and it's one of the things that makes this more interesting to me. They think it might be Carignan or it might be Dolcetto, but they don't know, and that's what makes it fun. On the palate, that vinegary tang kind of continues. It's definitely got some funk and it's definitely got some earthiness. It's not a wine for the faint of heart. And I also really think that although this wine is really good to drink on its own, and we certainly have drank a few bottles of it at the warehouse, just sharing it amongst people who are working here, what I think this wine is going to really shine best with is next to spicy food, next to garlicky food, next to something with some vinegar or some tang in it. And we have a recipe for some cabbage with chili crisp that's going to be so good with this. So that's in your recipe guide, and you should check it out. Next is this 2015 Lindes de Remeyori Rioja. And this is from a Rioja bodega that's been around for decades and decades. But what's cool about it is the winemaker, Telmo Rodriguez, he was the son of the owner. And back in the 80s, he was kind of an up-and-coming winemaker himself and started doing projects all around Spain, including being allowed to start working on his parents' winery. And he wasn't really unleashed until, you know, a decade or two ago to kind of fully run the estate. But I love that what he's done with these Riojas, because we're not going with a style of Rioja that's the sort of more traditional classic style. It's very oaky and very sort of orange in the glass and brown and kind of oxidative is what we'd call it in the wine world. This is a Rioja that is a little bit more fresh. It's a little bit more bright. They certainly do use oak barrels to make this, but it's more neutral oak. So it's not new oak adding all these spice notes. It is neutral oak, just allowing a wine to kind of resonate and concentrate a little bit. So let's drink it together. One thing I would expect from a Rioja, and this one is 95% Tempranillo. I think there's 5% Graciano in this, which is another local Rioja grape. But this is really the soul of Tempranillo. It's red fruited and it's fresh fruited. It's not baked fruit. It's not sour fruit. It's not jammy fruit. It's kind of right in that fresh category where it's a little bit tart to your palate, a little bit tart to your nose, but raspberry and cherry and a little bit of cranberry here. And the other thing I love about Tempranillo, especially one with about 6 years of age, is that it starts to take on just a touch of leathery components, and you might even say there's like a curry or hard spice note here. It finishes very both tart and silky at the same time, because this is grown in a northern and high altitude part of the Rioja region where you get a little bit higher acidity in the grapes. So this is Tempranillo with that sort of fresh red fruit, and also finishes nice and tart and crisp, even for a red wine. But the silkiness here is undeniable. It's definitely got some texture and some weight and richness. This to me is definitely one of the red wines you'd want to serve alongside roast meat of any kind. You could do roast chicken with this, roast pork, beef tenderloin. I think we have a recipe for beef tenderloin with mushrooms going along with this one. So check it out. I think it's wonderful. This next wine is from Chateau de Cuasillo, and this is in the Cahors region of southwestern France. And we think about southwestern France, we think about the Atlantic coast of France, and we're going south of the region of Bordeaux into the sud-ouest, or the southwest part of France. Cahors is a region that is famous for Malbec. And when you think about Malbec, sometimes the first thing you think of is Argentina. Well, originally, this grape was French. It had to start somewhere, right? This was a grape that was grown widely in Bordeaux, in the southwest of France, sometimes in the Loire Valley, and it made a new home in Argentina after the phylloxera epidemic in the 1800s in Bordeaux. But what's cool about some of the new families, and this is a great example, the Chateau de Cuasillo, this is a small family who's been farming this area since the early 80s, and now their kids are starting to get involved and take over, and they're doing an amazing job. But they're really saying, hey, Malbec was originally French, and we think that the best expression of Malbec in the world is French. Doesn't mean there's not amazing expressions in Argentina, and there very much are. I've had many of them. They're great. But France is now starting to take back a little bit of its Malbec street cred a little bit. And this is a good example of it. It's 100% Malbec. To me, it encapsulates what I love about Malbec, that it's kind of a deeper, darker, inkier style of wine. I mean, look at that in the glass. It is very much not translucent. It's a purple wine. It's ready to go. So let's take a sip. Definitely red and black fruit here. You got like damson, black plum, blackberry, but also a little bit of that red plum and red currant. On the palate, this is unmistakably an old world wine. You know, if we put this next to an Argentine Malbec, the Argentine Malbec would finish more luscious and more sweet on the finish in terms of its overall profile. Well, this Malbec finishes tart. It finishes earthy and dry, and it's letting you know that it's definitely an old school French wine, but one that is really well made and really well balanced. So this is the Celice 2018 from Chateau de Cuasillo, and this is in the Cahors or Cahors region of southwestern France. So this next wine is from the oldest winemaking region in the world. This is from Georgia, and this is the Maranelli Mucazani. And this is coming from the Kakheti region of the country of Georgia. Kakheti is one of the famous wine regions of Georgia, and we are growing maybe the most well-known red grape in all of the Georgian wine country, and that is Sapravi. Sapravi literally means inky. So it's something that they actually, once upon a time, dipped their pens into in order to write ink on the page. That's how dark this wine is, and that's how prized it was, not just for drinking over the centuries and millennia, but literally to write with. When I look at this wine, you can see that. It's very dark, it's very dense, it's very chewy. What does Sapravi taste like? I think one of the first things I think of with some of these old school classic grape varieties, and you get this a little bit in Merlot and Syrah sometimes, is that it has a distinct grapiness, like almost Concord grapiness, not to an unappetizing, cloying, sweet degree, but just in a way that lets you know this is a great product. Beyond that grapiness, I get a lot of black fruit, a lot of like black plum, blackberry, and a lot of spiciness. There's a little bit of like spice cake or British Christmas cake here, where there's some clove and there's some sort of like allspice, cinnamon, spice notes laying underneath this. This is a wine that saw stainless steel fermentation and a little bit of aging in neutral oak. What's cool about this too is that on the palate, it definitely hits with a big rush of rich fruit, but finishes with some serious tartness. Sapravi's prized for not just being a rich, full-bodied fruity wine, but it also has a high degree of tartness and acidity on the finish, which helps balance out that rich fruit. If you just had rich fruit, it would be boring. It would just be cloying and syrupy, right? If you just had acidity, it would be thin and shrill and too tart on your palate. So if you have a little bit of rich, ripe fruit, you have a little bit of acidity too, it works really well together. And that's what I love about this wine. This is also a 2014, so we're looking at a 7-year-old wine right now that's showing beautifully, and it's developed, but it's also drinking fresh. It doesn't taste tired whatsoever. I think it's so cool that we're being able to pour something from Georgia, of all places. It's really the cradle of winemaking. It's where the grape came from before it spread its way around Europe and the Mediterranean. So really hope you enjoy this Sapravi from Mucozani. This wine is something that's been a long time in the works, and this is called Illicit 7. This is Crunchy Red Fruit's very first private label, and I am so excited to be able to introduce this to you. This started from a desire to say, hey, we want to put our own stamp on things and show you wines that if we were going to make a wine, we would make something like this. It means that sometimes we break a few rules, or we don't do the most popular marketing things. There's a big push over the last 20 years or so to label every single wine you possibly can by single vineyard, and label it by single vintage, and label it by single variety. But if you look at what winemakers were doing 100 years ago and in some of the other regions of France and Italy, there was a lot of blending happening. That was blending amongst vintages, and in fact, places like Champagne, that's still the norm. And there's blending across regions, and there's blending across different grape varieties that may not be considered classic. Thankfully, really the amount of blending here is not too suspect. What we're doing is 3 different vintages of Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley, and there's just a tiny sprinkle of something else. We're not going to say what it is, but we're talking about 1%. Really, our focus was to zero in on one vineyard over 3 vintages in one specific place. So that's where 99% of the grapes and the wine are coming from, is 3 vintages, but 1 vineyard in Willamette Valley. I will say that it's in the Willamette Hills, and that's about as far as I'm going to tell you. This is something that is a passion project for me, and I approached Jeff Lindsay Thorson of WT Vintners, who's a great sommelier. He's the wine director at RN74, but he's also a very accomplished winemaker, and now he's, almost 10 vintages into his own winery at WT Vintners. And in terms of people that understand Pinot Noir and understand Burgundy, he's one of the best I know, because he's worked with one of the great Burgundy wine lists in the US for a long time now, and he gets it. He knows what he's doing. So this is Illicit 7. We actually tapped one of our friends. His name's Tim Lamb. He did the design for the Trolls movie. He designed a lot of the characters. He's an incredible artist, and we reached out to him and said, hey, Tim, we would love if you could design a wine label for us, and so he did. And so he came up with this awesome little motif of like cowboy hats and the shushing, and I just love it, and I'm just going to let it tell its own story. But this is Illicit 7. Let's taste it together. A lot of red fruit here. So this is red cherry, this is like fresh strawberry, ripe raspberry, and also floral character. And again, tying with that flower theme, like all these wines to me have a floral essence, especially the Sapravi, especially the Beachy. And this wine is one of the ones that really reaches that floral thing in a huge way. It's very like violet and like apple blossom and lots of other fun stuff going on in here. There's a undercurrent of spice here. Some of this wine has seen a little bit of oak, but not a lot. Just enough to kind of give some of that vanilla bean and hard spice like cinnamon and clove. Then on the palate, there's pepper. There's a little bit of like toasted pink peppercorn, floral character still persisting to the palate. The finish on this wine is great. It is exemplary Pinot Noir. I love the way it's drinking. I'm so excited for you to try it. And for you to try something that just says non-vintage American red wine, which is like the most generic category we could possibly put it in. We didn't really want to be bound by the rules of different appellations or states. We wanted to make something that we knew was hand harvested, we knew was organically farmed, we knew was treated really carefully in the winery, but didn't necessarily have to conform to the rules of an appellation or the rules of a state. And so that's why we have this. That's why we have Illicit 7 in the first place. I think you'll really enjoy it. We only have a limited amount. Rumor has it it's going to be poured by the glass at canvas, so it should be fun. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers.